Hello, welcome. We're going to talk about composting today. I'm Andrew Morris with Savannah Hydroponics and Organics, and thank you for tuning in. So, just want to introduce composting to you and give you some definitions, talk through some science, just give you some of the basics and ingredients, what we put in and what we don't into our compost, different locations and options to set up, and what we're looking for at the end is the finished compost that's going to help our plants thrive. Again, Andrew Morris, Savannah Hydroponics and Organics. We started this shop back in 2009 because we didn't see anything like this where folks could get high quality organic ingredients and amendments and pesticides for their garden. And we truly believe everyone can grow some food at home. Whether you have a small apartment or many acres of land, there's always an option to grow some food at home. So thank you for joining us. What is compost? Simply material that has decomposed and can be added to your soil. It is something that happens in nature. So we don't have to do anything for composting to occur. However, for our gardens, we want to increase the amount of organic matter. So now time for a little bit of the science. So composting is the act of breaking down this organic material with microorganisms. These microbes basically do it for us. We don't have to do much other than create the right environment for them to thrive. So, some of these types of microorganisms are bacteria. They comprise the largest amount in compost. There's also actinomycetes. They're the web-like things in compost, and they have that earthy smell that is when you know you have a healthy compost. Also fungi, that's going to break down some of the tough, complex plant polymers that bacteria can't. But they all work together. So that's how that works. And on to the phases of composting. When we start our pile, the temperature isn't very high. That's called the mesophilic stage. It doesn't last very long. We then transition into the thermophilic stage, which is the majority of the time we compost. It's much higher temperatures, and it happens after the mesophilic, and then after that, it's the maturation. That's when our compost is getting closer to being ready to use, and the temperatures taper back down in this cooling phase. So we have aerobic composting. That's what we're typically trying to do at home. It means with the presence of oxygen. It's why we turn our compost piles, tumble our bins, and that's what we want to do in backyard composting. We also love vermicomposting. This will happen naturally. We'll get some native worms, whether it be night crawlers or any number of varieties, but they will find their way to your compost pile to help break down that food for you. Red worms are what's used in commercial vermicomposting. They do work well in our climate because they can withstand the hotter temperatures in our climate, but we love worm castings. It's very bioavailable. It's a good way to remedy problems with your plants and trees. Anaerobic is the last type. We typically want to avoid that. It means without oxygen. It's what happens in a landfill, and it's not great for the environment. It releases greenhouse gases, mainly methane. That's the worst one of the bunch. So, what are the building blocks of compost? We got water, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon. The carbon to nitrogen ratio is key. We need much more carbon than we do nitrogen. However, nitrogen is the fuel for our compost, so it's still very important. So, What are some carbon sources? The browns, we've got ashes, shredded cardboard, corn stalks, leaves, shredded newspaper, peanut shells, pine needles, sawdust, straw, wood chips. Some things like pine needles we don't want to use too much of, say no more than 10% because they can be acidic. Also got to watch oak leaves from oak trees, but yeah, we definitely need more carbon than nitrogen in our compost pile. So here is the list of high nitrogen greens: alfalfa, clover, coffee grounds, any food scraps, garden scraps, basically any yard trimmings, hay, manure, seaweed, vegetable scraps, weeds. There's some redundancies in that list. Just remember, as things decay, so say grass clippings, they're high nitrogen in the beginning. Once they turn brown, they become a lower nitrogen source. So 30:1 is the approximate ratio of carbon to nitrogen. Much more carbon needed than nitrogen. All right, what not to compost? We've had this discussion in our house several times about what to compost and what not to compost. So there's things like onions that you can compost, but you don't want to use too many of them because it'll make for a stinky compost pile that can attract varmints, just like any animal material can attract varmints. And lemons. Lemons have a really low pH, so they're acidic. And you can compost some citrus, but you don't want to do too much of it because it'll just mess up the pH. So then you'll need to add lime to neutralize, and that's not the whole, the whole idea is to create a free, easy, source of organic matter in compost. So these are some of the things you obviously don't want to compost. Anything that has never lived or is synthetic, like plastic, glass, metal. Commercial folks can compost animal bones and whatnot, but for us in the backyard, we really don't want to mess with any of these items here. All right, where do we put our compost? We need good drainage that's partially shaded. We don't want to block off any walkways or, put it too close to a fence because it's going to be sitting there for a while, and that just doesn't make sense. In the urban environment that most of us live in, a bin can help keep the smell down and also keep the animals out. These are some of the different types of bins and options. You can literally just make a pile in the corner of your yard, or you can use some pallets that have been recycled. You can use recycled food grade barrels. I like to drill a bunch of holes in them to increase that airflow that we've been talking about. Or there's fancy tumblers. I've never chosen one of these, but some people do. All right, when is your compost done? Well, it's going to look basically like just dark black soil or humus. You might see a few little pieces of twigs or eggshells, but that's okay. So we have some larger material that's going to take longer to decompose, but the idea is to break it down into smaller material to speed up the compost time. Also, the seasonal temperature can help, so we'll have a little bit faster composting in the summer months. So, in summation, microbes do all the work. The compost pile gets really hot. It then decreases in temperature as we're getting closer to being able to use it. And then we discussed what we need to have, as far as the building blocks goes, but we don't want too much water. So heavy rain, we can cover the compost, but basically, we don't want a stinky anaerobic mess. Thank you for tuning in. You can reach us at savannahhydro.com or call the shop, and we're happy to help. Have a great day and stay safe.